Well, yes, hello everybody. I'm Don Ward, Chief Executive of CIB, and on behalf of CIB, welcome to this workshop on impact of the global pandemic on our sector and our sector's role in society. Mainly today you're going to have the benefit of Michael Beam, our Programme Director, facilitating the session. But I will seek to make sure we keep to some sort of time. We promise that the event will be a maximum of 2 hours, and I'm sure it'll be a productive session. Our goal is to share what CIB members are doing in this area of the impact of COVID, and to decide what, if anything, CIB should do going forward in terms of global collaborative effort, whether that's research or other activity. This is a workshop, so we are going to have some initial talking, but in general, we're looking for participation, ideas, contributions, and we'll be breaking into smaller groups for some of the time to make that easier. The agenda for the 2 hours, Mike, if we change the slide, thank you. We've got an introduction now of about 10 minutes. After myself, we'll hear from Lindell, who as a CIB board member really has led a lot of the debate at board level around this topic. So we'll just hear from him on his thoughts really on this subject. Then Mike is just going to give us an overview of some of the work that we know has gone on in research journals and so on, and some of the CIB webinars, such as the one run by Peter McDermott. Wow, that's over a year ago, Peter. We then give very, very quick round table. So, a minute, literally like a minute each, but looking at the current numbers, for anybody to just say what you're doing in relevance, if you think that there's something that we've overlooked or don't know about, or more to the point that you think other participants ought to know about. To use the chat throughout today's session and to follow up with emails afterwards to any of the secretariat. We as a minimum, we want to capture a decent report from today, which just summarizes some of the work that CIB members have done or are planning to do. That's the absolute minimum. I'd like to think that there would be outputs such as a thought leadership report based on the discussion, possibly 1 or 2 task groups. There may be enough interest for people to form a CIB task group to take forward work on a topic of interest. And there may be other outputs that people would like to do, perhaps a series of webinars or what have you. But so how we're going to get to that sort of outcome is 2 breakout sessions. The first to look at topics of in terms of where the impact is felt, impact in terms of research and practice in the industry, 25 minutes, and we'll allocate you, or you can choose which group to go into. And then we'll get some quick feedback from that session. That's item 3. Item 4 will then break into 2 different groups. There might be more than 2, by the way. There might be 2 groups looking at each topic. It just depends on how many of you finally attend. At the moment, it looks like just 1 group each for research, for practice, and then in the second breakout session, 1 group on education, 1 group on policy. Item 5, second rapporteur feedback. All of the breakouts will be introduced in more detail in terms of procedure by Mike Beam in a few minutes. And then we'll finish with a group discussion and a sort of so what next, what should the outputs be, and who's prepared to help take a lead in some of these areas as appropriate. So I hope that's a reasonable program for us to spend our time today. And if so, I'd like to invite Lindell, as I mentioned, CIB board member and champion for this topic really over the last year or so, just to say a few words. Over to you.
Right. Well, good to see all of you in the squares on my screen. My name is Lindell. I'm a professor at Chalmers University of Technology in Sweden, and for the last 10 years or so, I primarily spent my work relating to hospitals and healthcare and all that infrastructure that goes into that area. And one of the reasons I've been discussing this topic and partly being responsible for initiating this together with Don and Michael and others at CIB is that we have a tendency to look at the sector we are in, and to also to the various work groups we have within CIB, and look at the bits and pieces that we all do. It might be a little bit here, it might be safety there, it might be something else there. And it is important, I think, to actually acknowledge that we are, as the construction sector, in all its wide variety of approaches and activities, not just a sector for society. That is, we build this infrastructure that we all need for healthcare, but we're also part in society. We are actually the ones providing the roads for the ambulances. We also provide all the infrastructure for buses and travel, for shops, for housing. And given the kind of pandemic we have now, every area counts. Just imagine if we would rebuild all our cities taking in this social distancing into account. What would that do with shopping centers, streets, and pedestrian crossings? What will that do to bus systems or to taxi stations? I mean, we go down to those bits and pieces. And so our entire built society in which we act, and which is our profession and the profession of all of you that have joined us here today, we're not just producing the bits and pieces, we are an integral part of this. And I think it's important to discuss the effects of the pandemic also on that level, how we as a sector contributes to keeping people in jobs, developing society and its infrastructure, so that we can manage in a resilient way these challenges also in the future. We also have a lot of other futures like environment, etc. We're not focusing on that and that area today, although they are equally important. Today we're focusing on something which is close to all of us, our own health and how we are affected. And I think that all of us after this meeting, we're going to go out to have a cup of coffee, go home, or go to another room where we are, and we will meet people and we will keep distances. The question is, are the corridors big enough? How has the construction sector provided us with the tools to maintain a quality of life also in the future after the pandemic? So to some extent, big words, but I think it's also important to look at us and the sector as a part of society that actually makes it possible to manage this pandemic and other coming challenges. And I hope these first short words inspire to discussions coming now. So over to you, Don, or do you want me to continue?
Well, Joran, that's great. Thank you very much. And I'll now invite Mike Beam, our program director, to just take over for the next little piece of work, in which he's been looking at some of the research and publications that we know about over the last 18 months in this area.
Thank you, Don, and thank you, Joran. I thought, great introduction, great inspiring words. Joran, I really liked what you said about, challenging us to think, what if we designed the built environment and our infrastructure with social distancing in mind, and how would that change? And I think that's a really fascinating question as we go through this particular session. It's a very high level challenge, and I hope it inspires our workshop participants to think differently. I just want to share just a few of the items that I found, just doing a quick search of some of our encouraged and recognized journals. And there's been a lot of information about COVID that has come out, and in the construction sector, Construction Management and Economics, one of our top journals. They actually have a special issue underway right now, which had started back in December of the previous year. Some folks that got together, and so and we can actually share that particular special issue with folks. The call for papers just as an information source. So I think we'll do that for the workshop participants. But some of the other I'm just giving you some of the titles of the articles here. Looking at public-private partnerships, there was an article in CM&E. Change that slide. And Building Research and Information is another one of our top journals, and they had a couple articles in as well, looking at human behavior, looking at building information modeling, and so lots of things, being applied under the guise of the global pandemic. Another journal, that is a recognized journal, International Journal of Construction Management, also had something about the spread of COVID-19 on construction site and how to assess and measure that. And I believe that was from an author out of Brazil, who's been doing some other work on COVID spread as well. So some interesting recent research applied to the construction sector. I also found some articles in the journal Safety Science, which had a couple construction sector articles as well too. So things are emerging in terms of, you know, the start of the pandemic, the middle of the pandemic, and, you know, now we're thinking, how are we coming out of the pandemic? And so, you know, maybe that will be a particular theme, and going along with Goran's idea and overarching proposal of, you know, how do we design things differently, and how do we plan things differently, and how do we organize both the construction site and the built environment, the design in general, for both worker safety and public safety and health. So really interesting challenges. And now, you know, Don and Jorn, I think I'm going to stop sharing, and you know, it's that part of the agenda where, oh, I'm sorry, was I stuck on a particular slide, or did I? Is it off now? Are we back on track? Okay, good. Sorry about that, folks. I had a little internet error that popped up on my screen, and so I hope we're back on track now. But now we're at the point of the agenda for attendees to kind of just give, you know, as we're all in the general session, to maybe give an overarching view. If anybody would like to share and take over the microphone, believe there is a hand button at the bottom of your screen in the reactions if you'd like to raise your hand and verbally share for just, you know, maybe 45 seconds or 60 seconds, maybe things that you're working on, things that you're thinking about working on, research, policy, practice, education areas that come up that have to do with the pandemic, or feel free to do something in text chat as well too.
John, we can see some names out there that we know have been doing work in this area. So any opportunity, please, to share what you're doing with the rest of the attendees today must be of interest and helpful to others. Yes,
Don was saying in the beginning, you know, Peter McDermott ran our first COVID workshop, and Peter's here today. That was a wonderful, inspiring workshop and panel discussion that Peter and his working commission organized. And again, as Don said, you know, this is really billed as a workshop. So really looking for folks to see if they'd like to share some initial thoughts. And I do see one hand. Rahimi, it would be great to hear from you.
Hi, good morning and good evening, everyone.
Good morning, good evening.
Good morning, good evening. I hope all of you are doing well. So just to share a bit what I'm currently doing. Before this, I got a small research grant from the ministry to see what's the impact of COVID-19, and also we also try to see what's the best solution to address those impacts. So we did that study early last year, 2020, and we already early this year, sorry, 2021, and we already provided the report to the ministry. But on the other hand, we do some. I did some publishing for journals. So like the impact, what's the greatest impact, the critical impact, and also we try to model between the impact and also the solutions. And lastly, we also did some evaluation of the solutions using fuzzy synthetic evaluation, but using the same survey. So what we did, we actually we interviewed 40 people. The survey to collect data, and then the survey currently we also collected data from India and also currently in Sri Lanka. So that's what I'm doing right now. And for the future, I think maybe one thing that we can do is maybe we can look into the logistics part or the supply chain, because I think yeah, based on the survey data from 2 or 3 countries, it shows that yeah, it was very much disrupted. So if we can restructure or diversify the supply chain, then maybe it would help us in the future. So if something like this happens again, or in a country or some places, maybe it will not affect that much. I think yeah, that's just a bit that I'm trying to explore. But if you have any other ideas or anything to share, please feel free to share. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much, Remy. That's some really fascinating work, and good for you for getting in touch with the which ministry, and you're in Malaysia.
So we did under the Ministry of Higher Education.
Great.
Reports and sent to all the other ministries. So yeah, our report was selected, and then so it was more work to create more of the report, but at least we felt it was a fulfillment for us because it was selected and shared, and hopefully can change some of the policy, especially on how our government is spending the money. So instead of just giving the money out through all the industry at the same amount, maybe they can go into more specifics. For example, to the small medium enterprises and also large enterprises, they have different impacts. So that's the intention of the report.
Thank you so much. And yeah, and for other workshop participants, thinking about things like a meta-analysis and comparing results as each region, each country does some similar work to assess the impacts and things of that nature. Those types of meta-analyses might be really, really fascinating. Joran.
Yeah, I think it was good pointed out here by Raimi about the logistics and the supply chains, which was actually the supply chains also ties the sectors in the different countries and different parts of the world also together, because supplies are becoming short of materials. But also I think it's important to perhaps support you, the other participants in coming forward with some interesting information here, is that because one thing is the thing that we do relating to a summit, but also have you engaged in debates on these more sort of societal impacts? I mean, in some places, the relationship of effects of COVID in relationship to workforce have been quite huge. I mean, what has happened to that? And a lot of maintenance work have been postponed. So I mean, this has affected us and the sector in many layers. So please share also such sort of views from your various vantage points.
Thank you, so yeah, when we did the interview, yeah, so most of them they felt that so yeah, we did, and most of the times the society impact is more on the industry wants to move forward, but they did not get the approval. So let's say, yeah, there's the approval from the ministry. There's also approval from the local authorities. But because of people are working from home, so the effectiveness of the approval process is a bit slower, and that impacts more on the project. So they cannot move on. So that's what during the at least. We did the interview actually around last week and 2 weeks ago. So this was the latest situation right now when we do the validation process. I hope that answers your question, or no?
Yeah, well, it was not actually a question. It's more of a sort of a broadening of the things that we could bring up here in this session.
Are there any other contributions at this stage, or any other responses to Joran's provocation there? Yeah, Henrik Bang, hello.
Hello. Sorry, I can't seem to find out how to raise the hand electronically, so I had to do it in real life.
You're in.
I have 2 observations on behalf of the construction clients here in Denmark that I would like to hear maybe your opinion on. The one is that during COVID, most construction sites in Denmark have actually been up and running. Only very rarely have they been closed down because of local outbreaks and so on. And what we hear from some of our member organizations is that actually cooperation, progress, and so on has been quite good, surprisingly good, in spite of the difficulties with supplies and so on. It seems that maybe the different parties in the construction projects have planned more, maybe have applied lean construction principles that they didn't normally do, because they needed to plan in order to sort of have different areas that where disease could not spread from one area to the other on the construction site. So actually productivity maybe have been higher than usually on construction sites because of this extra effort into, you could say, micromanagement or planning of the activities on the construction site. That I think is one interesting observation that might be true, might be not, but it could be interesting to look more into it. And how could we take this potentially positive experience further when we are coming out of COVID? The other area is maybe more property related, especially related to office buildings and office space. During COVID, many have worked from home instead of going into the office. The question now is, or we can see already that some employers, they are saying, we would actually prefer that you still work from home 1 or 2 days every week. This means we could have fewer work desks at the offices, maybe fewer square meters, but this would then entail more need for meeting rooms and other facilities in the offices, and maybe also an upgrade of work facilities from home. So that's another perspective that is sort of materializing, but is something that I hear from my member organizations, and it could be really interesting to have some research to substantiate, is this just people talking, or is this something that we're really going to see? So these were my 2 observations on with a Danish perspective, and I'm happy to say it seems that we are getting out of the COVID lockdown now, and things are looking quite okay here now. But knock on wood, you never know with COVID. Thank you.
Thank you, Henrik. And Martin Dada, you have your hand up again?
Yeah, my hand is up. Good afternoon. Yeah, good afternoon, good morning, or whichever time zone, good evening. Thank you for organizing this program. I only want to raise some things that could also contribute to our research agenda. Okay, I'm Martin Dada, Professor Dada from University of Lagos, Nigeria. One, I'm thinking we should also look at how do we integrate and simulate construction management education in the light of COVID. Yes, it is true that we are coming out of the COVID, but I'm also thinking that we should do a scenario analysis. Assuming there is such a development of COVID in the future or another variant, how do we handle construction management or construction-related education? We could do some online teaching, but what about the practical aspect? That could be one area that we've got to look at. Then I also look at facility management, and the last person who commented spoke about his experience from his organization, where maybe some employers will want some of their workers to work about 2 days in a week from home. Now, in that kind of a situation, how does it affect facility management practice, the design of spaces? Then lastly, what came to me now hard infrastructure is a major sign of development in any nation. Physical infrastructure, roads, bridges, houses, and every other thing. But now, in the light of COVID, it's becoming more pronounced that digital infrastructure is a way of helping society, promoting productivity, as it were, in case of any epidemic or pandemic. So the issue is, I also think that we may need to also look at the digital infrastructure capacity of different nations to be able to respond to pandemics and emergencies. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Martin. And those are also very, the education aspect is also a very interesting one as well for us to consider. And with that, with these great comments, I think, this has sparked us into perhaps going into our breakout rooms. And I'd like to share my slides again with you. We're going to have, let's see here. We're going to have two sets of breakout sessions as we showed in the agenda. We'll spend about 20 minutes. The first one, you'll have the opportunity to choose from research or practice. And the second one, you'll have the opportunity to choose from education or policy. And, based on some of your feedback, we're going to ask you to pick a chair. If there's not, the first person on the list is hopefully, the chair. They gave us some information during our opening survey that we did last week. So thank you for those that responded and have volunteered to try to facilitate the session. And then we'll look for a rapporteur who will have a rapporteur report, a very quick rapporteur report, a couple of minutes on each particular group to share with the larger audience and hopefully inspire thought if you weren't in that particular breakout group. And so we can actually synthesize this particular session for all of CIB members. So I'm going to give you, there's going to be a breakout room choice that will pop up. It'll be either research or practice. And so if folks could, so there's about 20 folks here. So hopefully we get about 10 and 10 or thereabouts. And you have some productive discussions. Don and I will be hopping back and forth if there's anything you need or that we can help with. So, and then we'll come back after about 20 minutes. And just some guidance, just really quickly, confirm the chair, confirm the rapporteur. I think some of the thought-provoking questions provided by Don and Joran and all the attendees so far have been really, really fascinating. Also think about the upcoming World Building Congress and what should we be doing something at the World Building Congress, which is coming up in about, 9 months, I think, 9 or 10 months. And, CIB is interested in things like thought leadership reports, new task groups that can focus on particular aspects of the global pandemic and how it affects the built environment. Are there special issues of journals that folks would like to do around particular themes? We can work with some of our journal editors of our encouraged and recognized journals to help you do that. We can help you set up global webinars and panels to reach the global audience and record those for the future. And also thinking about what CIB is in terms of our international collaborations and the recommendations. I'm sure you'll hear a lot of regional and in-country types of things that are going on. In the research, we heard some things out of Malaysia, Sri Lanka, and India, and other parts of the world. And so things like a meta-analysis, comparing results, are all things that really can go into these particular discussions and outputs. And then we'll have some rapporteur reports. So are there any questions from our group before I offer you the breakout rooms for about 20 minutes? Are there any questions or comments? Any final inspiring words, Joran and Don?
Get going.
Get go. Okay, well, I'm going to open.
And I think it's just, I think you pointed something out which is important, Michael, because I think we have to go between projects and cases and studies and meta-analysis and back and forth. I think that's crucial because that's where we also will find interesting connections between what we do. And that will also, given Martin's input before, also provide us actually picture of what is the future into which these construction manager or construction engineers are coming, you know, so that's another part of it.
Well, thank you so much. I'm going to go ahead and open up the breakout rooms, and you'll be, in a few seconds, you'll be allowed to select. So please, you should be able to choose on the screen. Hello, everybody, and welcome back. I apologize to interrupt some great conversations. I was hearing some great conversations happening. It would be great to hear from the rapporteurs at this particular time. Maybe we could start with the research group. Yaron, would you mind?
Yeah,
You and
I
your
think,
rapporteur?
yeah, my rapporteur would be Rahimi, but if okay, I can just start basic by sort of repeating what we said at the end of the seminar or the discussion in our group, and that we touched upon we started discussing what people, how each of us had been affected in the project level where we work, and we had noted areas like some of us studied the effects of the built environment and on the built environment, which is quite obvious, but also about project delivery and more in a management way of the areas we work with and how teams and project delivery is being affected. But also we talked about education, came up quite a few times about how we actually make the students, how do we teach students about a sector where you also need to be in is a big challenge. We also had issues like talking about circular economy and also then a new way of looking at materials and the way we work and the resources we use. And of course, all of this, if you would summarize it, points to that we as academic institution needs to support our students in coming out into the sector with a number of new behaviors that we ourselves did not have when we entered the sector. And that's, of course, a transformative action that we have to do as teachers to enable the students to come out and be productive and contributing, given that they have a much different context than what we once had. So that's, of course, a challenge for all the academics. That this was not the main, sort of the only main thing, there was a number of main things, but I think this is a good takeaway from our discussion. I don't know if Rahimi want to complement with the notes, add or change.
We could move on to the practice session, rapporteur.
Afternoon, thanks. I think in the research, on the practice session or breakaway session, we started by looking at the advances that might have happened in industry as a result of COVID, as a result of the pandemic, and the need to manage these challenges on the short term and for the long term. And we looked at what kind of changes have come through and should be sustained, and what kind of challenges have been faced. So basically, we started by looking at the integration at the broader level of different perspectives, of different stakeholder bases within our industry. We gave an example of the Construction Leadership Council and what it's done thus far in trying to aggregate the various voices that we have and trying to bring about best practice and mandates of how to operate safely on within the construction environment. And we think it's something that ties into what has happened in the previous past, when we used to have the CDM regulations and social value laws come into place at the policy level. We also looked at the need to maintain labor capital balance across contexts, because we understood that increasing mechanization had happened during this period, and most clients were willing to or susceptible to continue furthering modern methods of construction, introducing technology. But we also had to understand that for some of us who have come from developing country contexts, there was the need to actually secure trade-offs between the use of technology and manual intensive labor practices on sites to cater to social ills, upheavals, and things like that that we would have in this part of the world, and also to look at the issues of aging workforce across the board. Again, it was also observed that there was a need to rework the ways our supply chains work, particularly because most of the workers in countries like Finland, where you might end up using migrant workers, oftentimes with the lockdown that we had, it was difficult for most of those migrant workers who had traveled home to get back into the country. But again, we have to start looking at how can we use research to provide workable means, testable means of allowing for easier assimilation and integration if such a thing happens in the future. Again, we also looked at the materials, use of local materials. Due to logistic issues, most countries in the developing country context, and even in the developed country context, would import materials, construction materials from neighboring countries or from overseas. And in situations where, like what we experienced during the lockdown, you would find out that it would be difficult for construction sites to receive supplies, prescribed supplies. So this would also, would believe that this would spiral research in areas that have to do with locally sourced construction materials and how to utilize them effectively to suit the context. And again, we also looked at how practice can be enhanced using reworking our designs that we have now. How do we rework practice? How do we identify exemplary cases that we can of best practice, for instance, within the COVID era, and how do we take that forward? How do we problematize and provide solutions to or extend issues that have to do with these best practice cases? So I think that's what we discussed. And again, to look at how we can influence policy from the experiences that have happened during this era. Thanks. I believe I've captured most of the things. If I've not,
Thank you.
Can. Yeah.
Thank you, Bawozi. Very, very comprehensive and some great discussions that were going on. It sounds like I really liked what you said. And it was the theme I think in the other, that some other folks had said in the beginning and then in the research workshop about what changes have been made that we should continue with and be sustained that are really good practices. I think there was a challenge early on about how from our colleagues in Denmark about how productivity may have actually been increased. And there was a comment in Jorn's workshop about how someone was doing some cross-cultural collaboration in education. And so how has the pandemic really sparked some innovative ideas and practices that we should maintain and sustain? So great job. Are there comments for Bawozi and the other folks in the practice workshop?
I could share a reflection. And I think that what you bring up here, Michael, is that we probably have all changed things and behaviors during the pandemic. And I think it's good now to, given the assumption that it's not going to go away, but given the chaotic first period of this pandemic, we did a lot of things differently. And the question is now that we need to sit down and also look back at them and evaluate them. And those things that we did in a different way that were good and worked better, we should keep them rather than just moving on and forgetting on why we choose to do them the way we did. I think that's an important lessons learned, actually.
Yes, we're going to move into sessions, and of course these sessions all really tend to overlap. It's hard to keep in a particular funnel, but we're going to call these next two sessions education and policy. And there's going to be some, I hope, breakout rooms come up within your particular window in Zoom for education and policy. And folks that have signed up to maybe be leaders, again, Yoran and Rahimi, you folks were very eager to help. And so if you could lead the policy session, and then Hadi in the education session, and Hadi will need a rapporteur. We had not so many people sign up to be rapporteurs, but that's a great job to take some notes and report back. So I'm going to open up the rooms and we'll give you about 20 minutes and I'll look forward to the great conversations. And if I can help you join these rooms, please do let me know. Would the policy group like to go first, or should I and the education group go first, Jorn?
Well, we could go first in the policy group. We really got started on discussion right away. So I don't know, did we have a rapporteur, Rahimi? No, we didn't. We just got started, didn't we? So I think that.
I took some notes. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Would you like to share them with us then, Rahimi? That would be good.
Yeah. So some of it relates more to the impact. on funding. I think we've discussed about that, and also is to help the construction workers, and also some policies even to make some payment on time, especially in developing countries where some participants said that even the construction projects are completed, but the payments are not there, and then they have some difficulty to pay the workers, and yeah, also to face these difficulties, this impact. Some suggested that we should have some policies related to technology, where we move to automation. But even though we go to automation or technologies to help us in the future, but we also need to look into the manual labor, where we don't forget about manual labor. And another thing is also redesign of the space. So we talk about redesigning our space in our construction projects and also in our building. So in construction projects, maybe before this we don't have enough space, or now maybe it's better to have more space and also more entrance or exit. So some participants say that yeah, our designs are too rigid, and maybe a better design for the future, especially when there are laws or regulations that restricted the design to be more responsive. That's another policy that way we can look forward, and also to have a plan B, if another pandemic comes. Yeah, I think that's all I have to summarize. I don't know if you have anything else to add, right?
Well, I think that what needs to be added was actually something emanating from Manila's comment on that. And we also, given that the sector is affected by so many various policies and regulation, it's actually mirrors how, if you like, important we are, because we're actually part of all sorts of levels in the society. I mean, it's procurement regulations, workforce regulations, all about labor force and regulations relating to social impact and finances, regulations for contacts, etc., but also policies and regulations regarding to historic buildings, accessibility. I mean, it's a wide range of that. And of course, if you have policies pushing different or hard, or more or less hard in different areas, it will be very difficult for the sector to be effective under a pandemic context. And if the sector then is important to be ongoing, to keep the workforce on the job, so to say, in order to support social cohesion and that to work, it really becomes important that we have a policy approach that enables the sector to continue to work under conditions like this. And I mean, it's not just that we have the lack of going to work. It's also, I mean, this affects consultancies and knowledge management and development. How do people meet? When do we meet? How can we share knowledge? And of course, the discussion, how far can we go by virtual teams, but also how can we teach students that can't go to construction sites, etc., etc. So it sort of affects all levels of the sector. And of course, just simply traveling to the work site will be an issue here. And if you have workforces that are traveling and works abroad or remotely, and they live together in barracks and similar things, that's yet another dimension of this. So the list could be long.
Great, thank you. Other comments from the policy group, or questions for the policy group, or comments? Okay, well, I can try to summarize with some help from my colleagues in the education group. We talked just a lot about how the pandemic has really changed education and its delivery, and the need for the disciplines that we're in of architecture, engineering, construction management. Is very laboratory based, it's very field based, very practical and hands-on. And so the struggles of really meeting those studios and those laboratories was brought up. And We talked about, there could be potential research in terms of how do employers feel who are hiring these new graduates who maybe did not get the full effect of some studios and laboratories and field experiences. And so maybe there's some research there, some graduate surveys, some employer surveys. We brought up things like digital infrastructure and looking at digital laboratories and comparing our disciplines to things like the physical sciences, which we may have some things to learn from the physical sciences of chemistry and biology. But really there's a lot of opportunity in terms of breaking the barriers. We need to think about how is the teacher-student ratio changing due to technology. And there were some recommendations about getting some, having top expertise around the globe to impact students and to be collaborative. And so, can we, can I, or could Yoran do a lecture on an area of his expertise that could then be archived, and universities around the world could, go to that particular lecture on CIB's website, and then, maybe even invite Yoran in to do a Q&A. We call that here in the States, we call it flipping the classroom, where students view a pre-recorded lecture and then they come to class prepared to discuss the ideas. So I think things of that nature.
I don't mind being a flipped teacher.
A flipped teacher. We will flip you. Yes, that's just what we call it here in the States. I apologize if that doesn't. Maybe.
No, it makes perfectly sense.
Okay, maybe. Colleagues from the education group, would you like to add some things? I know there were some great comments.
Yeah, thank you, Michael. We also spoke about students' engagement in the age of this digital. How do we measure students' engagement, attention issues, and everything with the new technology options? Thank you.
Thank you for adding that. Yes. Other comments? And comments from the other group for the education group, or any questions or thoughts?
A question for me of ignorance, Mike. Why? What aspects do we think we could learn from natural sciences like physics, chemistry, biology, and the way they teach? I just didn't quite follow the point. What's an example of that?
Yeah, well, I believe there's some anecdotal evidence. I'm not totally familiar with it, but I believe there's some, they're already doing some online laboratories, even before the pandemic.
I see. Thanks.
So, yeah. Well, this is the time, I guess, maybe we're shifting into the final portion of our workshop, the final 15 minutes, where, we hope this was beneficial to hear other ideas from other researchers around the globe. I hope that some collaborations could actually be fostered, and it would great to see, kind of great to see, what folks think after going through and kind of hearing from the larger groups. And your individual breakout rooms. What's next? What should we do next? What are some action items that you should do, that CIB should help you facilitate?
Yeah. Is there a interesting session that we should aim to put on at the World Building Congress in terms of panel debates, perhaps? Is the task, are there certain working commissions who've got a particular angle on this? I heard 2 or 3 people make references to the fact that the challenges, the impact of COVID is very different in developing countries. Well, we've a working commission specifically on construction in developing countries. Is that commission looking at this topic, for example? is there a new area of work that enough people would like to have another meeting about, or but that might perhaps, you know, develop into a task group, with perhaps producing, you know, with the task being maybe quite a short one, to produce a report within 6 months or 9 months that again could be shared with the World Building Congress in late June 2022.
And Bawuzi has his hand up.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mike. I think I'm just adding on what Don has just mentioned of. I think, yes, I understand that there is the Working Commission 107 that looks at developing countries. But I think if we're going to look at it from that perspective, we can't really just single out the context, but we'd have to look at the comparison that happens across contexts. So I think, for example, if we're looking at smart cities, for instance, there is a movement towards smart cities in developing countries as well. It's become sort of the fad, if I would use that word. So how do we compare the contextual peculiarities, or appreciate the contextual peculiarities across these contexts, and what do we prioritize? So what we're prioritizing in Finland, in a smart city in Finland, wouldn't be the same thing we're prioritizing a smart city in Nigeria, for example. So would it be issues of mobility? Would it be, and how do we work around that nexus to create a resilient environment that negates infections and rapid spread of infections and things like that, if we're working from back to the front, from COVID to the future? Again, another thing is, if we look at the education, the educational requirements, like we talked about, I understand there's some discussion that's going on, but we can look at skills. We always talk about Europe having an aging workforce, for example. We also look at migration. What is the impact of migration, and what kind of skills are required, and how do these skills, are the skills being formed in the developing countries, for example? There is, if you come to Europe, you know, countries leverage on the workforce of other countries. For example, the UK did it with Poland for a very long time, and people from elsewhere. So it will be, and what is happening in Qatar, where you have people coming from, Don is very concerned with this. So people come from elsewhere to work in Qatar. So how do we build on that nature, the kind of knowledge that, or skill sets that is seamless, and allows for seamless transitions across contexts, you know, accommodating the cultural dynamics and all that. So I think these are things we should look at moving forward. Now, what platform would be better? I wouldn't know. We've also talked about that within W92 on procurement. How do you use strategic procurement to drive the changes that we've witnessed now? And that's why we talk about trade-offs. If we look at it from that perspective, it could be a special issue, it could be a discussion panel or whatever. But how do we use strategic procurement to drive policy, just like it's been done with social value? I think it's been more than 20 years since McDermott and can't get this name again, came up with strategic procurement. And how do we use that now, post-COVID, to shape a better recovery, a more inclusive recovery for construction industries across the globe, developing and developed countries as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Louise.
Yeah, Mike.
Is there a comment for Louise? Yes, of course.
Yeah, I have a comment, and it's an addendum to what Bawuzi, the last speaker, just raised, and what the CEO of CIB also raised. For example, the issue of whether domiciling the research about COVID, special effect of COVID in developing countries. I'm taking off from where my friend, the last speaker, just the issue he raised. There are two ways to look at it. Since COVID is global, it is the effects that and the response to COVID that change in different regions. So one option may be to look at the fact that we have COVID in every part of the world, responses and effects are different. So what we can do may be that we may not limit it to the developing world, but because just like he said, if you look at only the developing world, a special task group on that, they would not have a reference to compare to. But can't we have something like a matrix, as it were, where we have people from the developed world, people from the developing world, they come together, and then they can have basis of comparing and looking at the parameters, and then looking at the individual content. It's just a thought, it's a brainwave. I'm not insisting, but just for us to consider various options of addressing the issue. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. And I know that Joran has his hand as well.
Yeah, it's two quick comments or reflections. I think that one is actually the one we brought up in our group, that, I mean, we could very well have a discussion or a report on how do we deal with a sector framed by policies when we need to move quickly because of challenges like pandemic. I mean, there is, I mean, it's just not about us wanting to sort of go past all policies, but it is actually about how do we make a sector adaptable to challenges like this when you're framed by policies, and probably by sort of bringing a few examples forward that could then feed a discussion on why it's important to have governments and policymakers being much more aware of what are the effects in a critical situation. If you like, politics might at that time be too slow. So how do we actually address these issues? That was one thought I had. And also another thing that I think is very interesting is that which I kind of like with the developing countries. I would very much like to have also a discussion on the developing countries looking at us, if you like, you know, looking at from your perspective, because I think that would open up for novel ideas, and I think that would be a very interesting discussion come out of that. And especially also when you think of workforce, social issues related to workforce regulations, that would be a very interesting discussion. And that will also bring culture context into it. But I think that would make for a really interesting discussion.
Thank you.
And yes, and one more thing,
yes,
education that was brought up, I think that's another interesting topic too.
Great. Are there additional comments from our group? So I guess as we come to the close in the last 5 minutes, you know, the question is, please do keep us informed of what you plan to do next as a result of this workshop. We hope it was beneficial to you to hear other colleagues around the world share their thoughts and ideas as we move through this ever-changing pandemic in the construction and built environment sector. Perhaps you've met a new colleague. Perhaps you've met someone that you'd like to connect with. You can certainly, that's part of CIB, is the collaborations and the network and learning about what other colleagues are doing around the world. So if there's hopefully there's some private chats going on. Maybe there's some new LinkedIn connections that are being made, and some new collaborations could evolve, and we'd love to hear about them. We'd also would love to hear about, again, what you think might happen next. And we know that, you know, there's a lot of information flowing, and a lot of times I know I'm gonna, you know, it maybe takes me a day or two to kind of really reflect on what I've heard and how I can contextualize it individually and think about some things. So as you move through your day, your evening, your week, please do let us know your thoughts and how CIB can help facilitate panels or workshops or new working groups for you, and connect you to different partners and things that CIB should be considering and doing. We have an upcoming board meeting in a couple of weeks, and so we'll definitely share these ideas that we heard today and any others that you have with the board to hopefully spark further interest. So Don and Joran, would do you have any final comments for our group?
Well, just to confirm on that, Mike, I feel that we ought to produce some sort of it'll only be short, it'll be a rough and ready summary of the discussion with you and me, and then with Joran by the end of the month, and circulate it to people who've participated today for any comments, anything to add to it. And as you say, we have a board meeting in 3 weeks' time, and the three of us will actually be together. Blimey, we'll actually have a board meeting for the first time in 2 years.
Fingers crossed.
I'm going to stay 2 meters away from each one of you.
So for the first time in 2 years, we may be able to have some really interesting discussions over the period of the 2-day board meeting. So we will engage the board in this discussion as well. But what is the other stuff that CIB should help facilitate? It was a global pandemic, and CIB is a global collaborative research network. So it would be surprising if CIB can't add any value in this area with our members. So I just want to thank Joran and Mike Beam in particular for facilitating the session today. Also, all our session chairs and rapporteurs, it was very good of you to volunteer. Thank you. We didn't give you any notice, so thank you for your effort in that respect. And as Mike says, please let us have any final comments the next day or two, and then look out for this short report and have a look at it, review it quickly, and Joran and I and Mike will take that to the board in 3 weeks' time, and we'll continue to give you feedback after that. And let's see if there are 2 or 3 really good next steps that we should lead on. Thank you, everybody. Joran, any final comments from yourself?
No, I think this was a very interesting seminar and discussions. Of course, I'd like to have had more people here, but I think that us that were here, we did a good job of gathering a lot of points and notes and comments. That is certainly enough to write a first statement yes. that could be built on, because as we know, we have vaccine to counteract death of COVID. We don't have vaccine to get rid of COVID. So we are entering a new situation where we will have to make considerations, and we also will have the situation in the future, at least for the next coming years, before we get this under in even sort of better control of its development. We will have people that are still affected and people who are not affected but are afraid of getting affected. So it will, for instance, that will have a huge impact on our educational systems. So this is, I wouldn't say it's a new normal, but it's certainly a different day than it was yesterday. And we're all here. And I'm not sure if you think of that, but your grandparents and parents and their parents before them, of some reason, they survived the Black Death and other pandemics that once were there. And now we have survived this one, at least so far. And it's our time to contribute and build forward for those that are coming after us. And we have a responsibility there. It might sort of seem sort of very high speech, but there's that dimension to it as well. So I'm going to put my bricks in that building for the future.
Bye-bye. Have a great day to all. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody. Have a nice day.
Thank you, Martin. All the best.